You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Good evening, everybody. Well, if anyone listened to Sean's show, I think I can honestly say it's an evening of amazing ladies in the paranormal tonight. Sean was interviewing the brilliant Hazel Ford of Haunted Happenings, and tonight's guest on Haunted Histories is actually the multi-talented Viv Powell, another amazing lady of the paranormal. So I'll introduce Viv properly a bit later when we go to speak to her, but she's probably quite well known to most of you. And whilst chatting with her, we discovered we had quite a lot in common. So I'm sure this won't be the only time I draw upon her knowledge and experiences for one of my shows, although I haven't told her that yet, so shh. Before I start on my history bit, I actually want to do a couple of birthday shout-outs, if that's okay. Cara Ford, you know who you are, my lovely. Happy birthday. And one of last week's guests, Ben Shalito of Helsham House fame. It's his birthday today. Happy birthday, sir. If you didn't catch, last week's show, as ever, you know the drill. You can go and check it out on Spreaker or YouTube. Download it, listen to it, and join us in the chat room wherever you can. Hi, Kerry. Hi, Kaz. Again. Well, tonight we're going to be visiting somewhere called Castle Rising in Norfolk. It's near a place called King's Lynn, for those of you who don't know East Anglia. And I thought that maybe looking at what I have now discovered to be what I think is one of the most brilliant members of the royal family that ever lived might be a good idea. Now, I know that sounds like a bit of a sweeping statement, and for many, knowledge of this person is probably scant at best and possibly completely oblivious for some. But I hope that following my little bit, and after listening to Viv and I talk, that may have changed, and you will realise why I say she, yes, she, is one of life's, well, amazing women. Her name was Queen Isabella of France. Now, Isabella was the daughter of King Philip IV of France, and she was born in or around 1292. Can't always be 100% sure with these sort of Middle Ages type ones because there's no real records. But she was betrothed to King Edward II of England in 1309. 1309, did I say that? 1307, sorry. And in 1308, around the age of 13, she was married to the man who was 11 years older than her. So far, so what, I guess. Young girl marries older man who was supposed to have been tall and handsomer, and let's face it, he was the King of England. Well, some reports say that the marriage was a happy one, at least in the early days, and the couple had 4 children together. The first in 1312, who was the future King Edward III, and the last being in 1318. But that's only one view, that it was a happy, harmonious, loving marriage. And other accounts paint what could be said to be a far less rosy picture. Edward II is known to have been a much less stereotypically masculine king than his father, Edward I, reportedly preferring poetry to jousting, handicrafts to war, and music to hunting. And he also enjoyed a very close relationship with one Piers Gaveston. One of history's great mysteries, really. Was it purely a platonic male friendship, or was there more to it? Homosexuality was seen as a very, very serious crime back in the 1300s, so even if Edward and Piers's relationship was a physical one, it would have had to have been in secret. And historians do say that, well, how could they have been? Both men had children with their wives to try and put that doubt, evidence of doubt, into was it a physical relationship. As time went by, Gaveston and Isabella ended up in a more cordial relationship than her having to fight constantly for her husband's affections, although that was possibly more to do with her father, the King of France's intervention, than Edward realising that his affections were possibly somewhat misplaced. But Gaveston was actually murdered by a couple of the barons who were also opponents of the king and felt that Gaveston had way too much influence on the decisions. That left a void in the king's court for another male confidant, and it was filled by a somewhat despicable character called Hugh le Despencer the Younger. Again, the rumours of a sexual relationship with Edward abounded, but a lot more circulated about this one, apart from him having, to be honest, a daft name. He was accused of land theft, torture, murder, false imprisonment, and also during a period of exile, which seemed to be common for people in those days. He was actually a pirate. Quite a history, eh? He and Isabella hated each other. There were some who believed that he may have actually sexually assaulted her or raped her at some point. He was also fundamental in the king deciding that she was basically a troublemaker and placing her youngest children in the care of the Despencer family and confiscating her land. He also is meant to have plotted against her an assassination attempt. Or maybe all of that is irrelevant and she just realised he was, well, in technical speak, a total arsehole. It was around this time that Isabella, probably around 1322 or thereabouts, realised that her marriage was pretty much over, and that any hope she had of working with Edward, her husband, to secure peaceful solutions to the conflicts that England were part of, wasn't going to happen. To cut a long story short, but if you are interested, do read up on this. Tales of assassination plots by way of necromancy being one such chapter in this soap opera of a royal family. Isabella was in France in 1325 to supposedly negotiate a treaty and was accompanied by Roger Mortimer, who she's believed to have been having an affair with long before this trip. A risky thing in those days. Women were imprisoned and left to die for extramarital affairs. Men were alright though, as always. In 1326 they invaded England, and they won. Edward II was deposed and imprisoned at Berkeley Castle. Supposedly, the rumours say that it was in a dungeon initially that was full of rotting animal carcasses and diseases, which normally had a good chance of killing a person off. But when he didn't die quickly, one of the rumours is that Isabella ordered his death, and he had use your imagination here, a medieval version of a colonic irrigation with a red-hot poker. Think about where a colonic irrigation has to go, and I don't have to describe it any further, but there is no historical evidence to back this up one way or another. And to be fair, reading up on Isabella the way I've done, she doesn't seem the sort to have ordered his murder. But who knows? What of horrible Hugh? Oh, his fate was quite sweet, really, when you consider what a nasty piece of work he was. Dragged through the streets naked, then hung, but before he could die he was cut down and tied to a ladder, where his genitals were sliced off in front of him and thrown on a fire. Then his entrails were pulled out, and they too thrown onto the same fire. His heart came out next, which killed him, at which point he was beheaded and his body sliced into 4 quarters. Although more contemporary reports only mention the hanging, drawing and quartering, not the castration. If I'm honest, I'm actually hoping it was true. Sounds like he deserved it, if you ask me. So what of Isabella? Well, she was regent for 4 years and ruled with Roger Mortimer. And although they probably bled the estate dry with the money that they're meant to have taken, She was actually quite influential in creating peace with Scotland via the Treaty of Northampton, plus various situations in France that she resolved. Although, as with all things, none of these solutions were perfect as far as the court and, some of the hangers-on were felt, and because she used realistic, peaceful and common-sense approaches to create these agreements. Surprisingly enough, the male members of the court were unhappy with this. Meant they couldn't go and swing their big swords around, I suppose. In the October of 1330, Isabella's son, the future King Edward III, led an uprising which resulted in the arrest and subsequent execution of Mortimer. And yes, they were brutal in those days, Kaz. Sometimes I wish they were still that brutal now, if I'm completely honest. Although Mortimer was not quartered or disembowelled, which was the normal result for treason. Edward then banished his mother from the royal court. Although he did not imprison her at Castle Rising, as some storytellers allude to. She had an income of around £4,000 a year, £4,500 a year or so, an incredible wealthy amount in those days. She was allowed to travel freely and even help negotiate with France on many an occasion. She threw lavish parties and enjoyed hunting and other regal exploits. As a mother and a grandmother, she had a close relationship with her children and grandchildren who visited her frequently, which lends further credence to the reports that she was not imprisoned at Castle Rising. Towards the end of her life, she actually became a nun with the Order of St. Clair, before dying in 1358 at Hertford Castle at the age of 62 or 63, depending upon the correct year of birth. So, that's my short summary of Isabella. Quite an amazing woman by any standards, even more so when you consider the time that she was around in. And up there, in my opinion, with other amazing warrior women of history such as Elizabeth I, Boudica and Cleopatra. So, on to another amazing woman. Aha! Do you like what I did there? Viv Powell. Let's go. Okay, and we're back. And obviously in the first bit I was talking a bit about Queen Isabella and how the fact I actually don't think she's as bad as history makes her out to be. In fact, I think she was actually quite a modern woman, especially for the 1300s. But we're now joined by friend to Parasearch and also co-owner of Paraforce UK conference with Parasearch's own Mr. Sean Cadman, who you'll show you would have heard before I came on air, Ms. Viv Powell. Hey Viv, how are you?
I'm fine, how are you?
I'm alright, thank you, my lovely. Thanks ever so much for coming on the show tonight to talk about we'll call it Castle Rising, even though the conversation we were having before you came on air is Castle Rising is actually the village as a whole, but people know the building as Castle Rising. Yeah. I mentioned that you're co-owner of Paraforce UK with Sean. You've got another one coming up this year in Skegness.
We have.
I believe. When's that, September?
It's September the 29th and 30th, I believe.
Right,
I know it's all on the website, so if anyone wants to know more, I would always direct them to the website, which is www.paraforceuk.com.
And you've got our very own Kerry Greenaway as one of your guest speakers this year.
I'm so excited to hear her talk, and I understand she's putting in a lot of effort into her talk. And she is. She's a very knowledgeable woman, but she is.
She's disconcertingly knowledgeable. You don't realise just how knowledgeable she is until you start chatting to her, because she's not one that pushes her knowledge onto you. Does that make sense? So,
yes.
Anyone going to listen? I know she's one of many of the amazing guests you've got this year, but I'm quite proud to see our own Kerry, see her name up there and her getting the recognition that I think she deserves.
I think so.
To be quite honest.
I think so.
But Paraforce isn't just all you do, is it, Viv? You've also got your own investigative team.
I do. I'm the owner and founder of RA Paranormal and Supernatural. We call ourselves RAPS for short. Mm-hmm. And you can tell it's us because we have this very silly logo, which is a bit of a joke, really, which is the ant. and it's because we're into motor racing, so I'm a huge Marc Marquez fan, and his logo is an ant. And I'm also an Adamant fan from years ago. So an ant just was, it was always there. So we thought, why not? We don't want a spooky ghost or anything like that. We don't take ourselves seriously unless we have to. Yep. So we just thought that the ant thing just fitted, and we wanted to be a little bit different and from everybody else, you know, that was out there. So that was our logo, the ant.
Very good, very good. Actually, my friend went to see Adamant live recently, and she said he was amazing.
And do you know something about Adamant? Not a lot of people know this.
Go on.
He's into the paranormal.
That doesn't surprise me, actually.
And I'm working on it. I'm trying to get him. I'm not even gonna get him for Paraforce, you know. I'm just gonna get a private investigation with Raps with Adamant, because I want to be locked in a dark room with him. I don't know.
Are you going to start singing Stand and Deliver and everything else at him?
There was another song that he did sing, and it had the words sex in it, you know.
Yeah. All right. Well, he was mind-blowingly pretty in his day.
Oh, he still is.
Is he?
When I look at him now, he could be Johnny Depp's older brother.
Ah.
You would have to get the two photographs together of Adamant today and Johnny Depp today. Put them side by side, and you'll know what I mean.
But no, I do remember in his when he did Stand and Deliver and amp music and all that, he was stunningly pretty.
But that's not all I do. I mean, I'm also I'm a spiritualist medium.
Right.
But I've come away from working with the churches and platform work, and I do more paranormal mediumship. So I'm more going into people's homes and helping them with problems. So yes, there is an investigation, but after that, it's depending on what the results yield and the time spent with the client. It's the counselling, the removal, if you like, and working with them after the fact and after that's happened. So there's a bit of that goes on as well.
Very interesting.
And I'm also in the middle of writing a book.
Are you?
I am.
Well, all about your experiences, or?
No, this is about a true story, and it's about a gentleman that we helped a few years ago, and he's given me permission to write his story. So it's very interesting, this story, and I suppose the theory behind it about what you do in the past, how it can affect you in the future on a paranormal level. So that book hopefully will be coming out soon.
Wow, you're busy.
I know, and this year I'm lecturing in Holland and in America on the paranormal.
Very busy then. Very busy.
I don't know how I'm going to fit all this in.
You need a PA.
I'm offering Penny. I'll back you up straight away.
Oh, I'm not a very good PA, I promise. I need one of my own at times. If you want the history stuff looked into, I'm your girl. But when it comes, I can't keep anyone on track. I have enough trouble keeping myself and everyone, the kids on track. Unless you need someone to come to America with you, carry your bags, Viv.
Okay. No problem. You're on my list.
So, looking at, we were talking before we came on air about some of the different places you've investigated, and there's some phenomenal places, some places that are pretty rare to get into. What place really, really sticks in your mind that you've been to?
I have two. Okay. This is places in the world that I've been to. Okay, and I've been to a few. I have two. Both of them are in the UK.
Right.
One of them is very famous. Well, they're both famous in their own right, but the Tower of London would be my number one. Yeah. Number two on my list, and only just behind the Tower of London, believe it or not, would be Castle Rising in Norfolk.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's useful, as that's what we're going to be talking about, isn't it?
But for what the castle is very misleading. the hauntings there, absolutely phenomenal. I'm not going to talk about Tower of London so much, because the Tower of London, it's difficult for people to get into. It's rife. It's the most haunted building in England, and this is my theory, there is no building that even comes close to that, for many reasons. Too many to go into on your radio show. Maybe that's another show, but
you never know.
But for building wise, that is the most haunted, and for the history that comes with it, you know. Castle Rising is another one. Okay. And there's lots of facets to Castle Rising that people don't realise. I'm really lucky, because one of my best friends is Norman Fahey, that was a curator at the castle and historian, and I get to hear and see bits behind the scenes that nobody gets to hear and see about, and I'm thoroughly spoilt, and that's all thanks to Norman Fahey, I must admit.
I know you mentioned he has a website that he puts his research.
He does. It's www.normanfahey, and it's spelt FAHY. .com.
And that's where he puts sort of his history research and things he's discovered and.
His archaeology, it's all on there. Anything you want to know, and you can contact him as well through the website or through Facebook, or, you know, he's quite happy to talk to anybody.
I think actually working as a curator or somewhere like that, and a historian and an archaeologist, would be my dream job, if I'm completely honest.
He's really jamming, because through his work and his archaeology, he's got to excavate places like Tutbury Castle. I mean, the stories that he's told me, actually living on the site of Tutbury Castle and what he did there, it's like, oh my God.
I would be, that appeals to me, the whole thought of being in an old building on my own as well at night and locking up, and even though I know it's meant to be quite frightening, I'd still relish it. So
it's an adventure,
isn't it just? So if we talk about Castle Rising, you know, I mentioned about probably the most famous resident of Castle Rising was Queen Isabella, the she-wolf of France. And one of the things you were telling me when we were chatting before we came on air was why it's believed she was known as the she-wolf of France.
Well, you know, I had this chat with Norman Fahey about that, and we understand that at the time of her being within the area of Castle Rising, that in the forest that surrounded it, if you like, they used to have a lot of hunting parties. I mean, they used to live, when she lived there, she lived quite a royal existence, you know. It was quite flamboyant, and she had the best of everything, and she would have people that come over to the castle, and she would entertain them with hunting, and she would take them out into the forests. Now, she had a love of dogs, and one of the dogs, it is said, was the Irish wolfhound. You know what it looks like, that big scruffy old they were quite big dogs as well.
They are big dogs, yeah.
And, people sometimes mistook them for a wolf, and she had a few of these, and some of them she kept quite close to her. The records of, she would have them on the property of the fortified building itself, or the castle itself. But and we'll come back to that as another story about that. But these dogs were used within the hunting parties. Now, Uncle Norm seems to think that because of these dogs, they were misconstrued over time as the wolf, and I don't know. I mean, there were wolves around, you know, a long time ago. A lot of them died out. Could they have really been wolves? I don't know. Who knows? But
you see, I thought maybe she was known as the she-wolf because of how not determined, that's the wrong word, but you know, when you read the accounts of what she actually did, she was a very...
She was a strong woman.
Feisty, but in a good way.
Oh yeah, and she did a lot of good. I mean, there's all this myth about her that she was this horrible person that killed her husband like herself, and gave her husband, the red hot poker treatment and all of this sort of thing. And actually, no, she wasn't.
Has Norman found out that Edward II didn't have a poker up his backside?
Well, I questioned him about that, and he said that it's all myth, it's misconstrued. We had debates and talks and things like that, and it's something that he skips over very, very quickly. So either he's hiding something that he doesn't want to talk about, or he doesn't know. And I asked him, because there's reports, but you talk about Isabella, that she was this bad person. And he says categorically, no, she wasn't. There are reports that she wails from the battlements today, that this is what a ghost does. I don't know whether it's somebody sensationalising it. I've been there many times. He's been there for years. And no, there is no reports. He does never seen anything like that, But when it comes to that, there's also this report of her son, Edward III? Forcing her to live, or basically forbidding her to leave Castle Rising,
imprisoning her almost in under house arrest. That
didn't happen either. He categorically states that. So I don't know. There's some things that you hear and you think, could she have done it? She might have done it for right reasons, but she might not have done it herself. Somebody could have done it on behalf of her. Do you know what I mean? But it doesn't make her a bad person at all. Not at all.
I don't think she was. I actually do think, and I said this in the beginning when I did my sort of history bit before you came on the air, that I actually do think she would have been a very powerful leader had she been born 700 years later, sort of thing, 600 years later. I mean, she was intelligent. She went out to France to negotiate a treaty with France. While she was kind of running the country before Edward III hit majority age, she was the one that calmed the whole thing down with Scotland, albeit she was unpopular for calming it because some of the things she agreed to, but she still calmed a very expensive war and stopped it. People criticise her for her sort of dalliance with Mortimer, but she was only 12 when she first met the king.
That's right.
He was like 23, I think, or something like that. And the reports are that he was too interested in Piers Gaveston to actually even sit with his wife at their wedding. And although she befriended Piers, after Piers was, died, murdered, whichever you want to call it, by some of the dukes and barons and everything that felt he had too much control over the king befriended one of the dispensers, and she hated this guy. And you think, it's just her being jealous. But then when you read about what this Hugh had done and the things that he did, and the fact that he's meant to even have tried the French to execute her when she was over there, you can kind of understand her being a bit annoyed with him and not liking him very much. And I actually think she's I can't see it. But the wailing didn't make sense to me. But one of the reports I had read is that there's meant to be a lot of maniacal laughter that comes from the castle.
That's not true either. There's a lot of reports about her that's come out. And don't get me wrong, it hasn't done Castle Rising itself any harm. In fact, it's brought more of an interest to the castle, which is great, because that's what Castle Rising needs. It needs people to keep going there. Go and see it. It's beautiful. Come and spend some time there. Spend some money in the gift shop, because it helps to keep the doors open.
History in general, these beautiful buildings that we've got. Yeah.
But there's lots of legends around her, and one which really amazed me, which I was quite gobsmacked when I read this, and this is something that I questioned, again, Norman Fire. I always go to Norman Fire if I want to know anything about Castle Rising, was that she was a formidable woman, as we know, but when she sank into old age, she suffered from violent dementia. The other.
Yeah.
And she kept herself in the whitewashed room of the castle in Castle Rising until her death. Well, actually, she didn't die there at all.
No, she died at Hertford, didn't she?
Exactly. And she was buried in the monastery of the Greyfriars by Newgate in London.
Yeah.
Now, there is records of that. So you hear all this stuff that goes flying around. I mean, is that something, again, that people make up these legends to attract all sorts of people, whether it be just somebody who's interested in history, ghost hunter, somebody that likes legends, myths and that sort of thing? What? I don't know. But the wailing and hearing the laughter and all that sort of thing, and apparently you can hear it from the village. Now, if you go to Castle Rising, it's a bit of a distance.
Right.
You're not going to hear anything like that at all.
Yeah.
In fact, and I know that because I've seen it, I've experienced it for myself. I've been with Norman there, when I've experienced it. I've actually experienced it on my own, in my own right, with my team. She walks the corridors of Castle Rising and she climbs the stairs and she does head towards the White Room, the whitewashed room that everyone talks about. If you're lucky enough, you'll be able to smell her odour. To me, it reminded me of a sweet smell like violets.
All right.
That's what it reminded me of. I mean, somebody else might smell it and think it's something else. The fabric of her dress, if you like, to me, the only way I can describe that is like a heavy, you know, when you get heavy curtains somewhere, you draw the curtains, you get that swish.
Yeah.
You hear the swish and you actually feel it and you feel the breeze of it as she comes past you. It's really strange.
So does she interact with you?
No, but I know that she is very aware of you being there. It's a bit like an aloofness with her.
Right. So it's not that it's residual. It's more that she, you're lower than her, therefore.
Yes.
Right.
And it's not in a nasty way, because she's got every right to act like that, because in her day I would just be the peasant, if you like. What are you doing on my property? You can't blame her for that. You can't blame her for that at all. But the amazing thing was when I was there a few years ago with Andy Radley, a very close friend of ours. I don't know if you know Essex Ghost Hunting Team, being from Essex yourself.
Yeah.
We invited Andy and some of the members from his team to come up with us and investigate the place. He managed to actually catch a full-bodied apparition of her in the White Room by sheer luck, and she actually had the dog at her feet. And if you look at the picture properly and you analyse it, it looks like an Irish wolfhound.
Right. That's one of the pictures you sent me to have a look at, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Have a little play and have a little look at it. I mean, it was sensationalised. It did hit all the newspapers and had a field day with it, because it was one of these that he used an infrared camera, a basic bridge camera that had been converted. But it was such a clear picture of her from head to toe, and it was like the Holy Grail. It's like, whoa, that's what we've been after for years and we never got it. You've been here 5 minutes and you got it. Brilliant.
But Andy he's an instrument sort of guru, isn't he? That's his sort of role, isn't it? Almost, it's the instrumentation, it's the technical. Yeah.
And also he has the spiritual element as well, so he does cheat a little bit. I'm just going to stand in here for a bit and leave me alone, sort of thing. He'll tell. He's not scared of telling you that. But and there were people in that photograph just sitting there with backs against the wall. He said he heard her walk up the stairs and he saw her coming in, and there was about 3 or 4 of them that actually witnessed the swishing of the fabric and that as she walked into the room, and bang, and they got that picture. It's just right place, right time.
But no, you're right. She wasn't the sort of. She wasn't put under house arrest. Her son the king used to come and visit her frequently. Her grandchildren would come and visit her. She'd go travelling. She was even asked, I think, to go to France to work on some peace treaty over there after it had all happened. And I think she's one of those women in history that seems to be ignored. You know, she doesn't get put in the same breath as other, in my view, powerful female figures.
No.
All people think of her is that she got rid of her husband because she was having an affair and then had him killed, which is about as far from the truth. Edward II was not a very effective king. Yes, he was a Plantagenet, but he wasn't an effective king. He wasn't very popular. No. There were all the beliefs that his relationships with the men in his life, with Piers or Hugh, wasn't necessarily platonic. No. Who knows? But you know, it's one of those situations where she'd have probably made a better queen than he made a king. She came from royalty herself. She was part of the French royal family, so she knew about being a noble.
And
but
again, you think of their mindset. Now, we're going back now to the 13. I mean, she lived there at Castle Rising between 1330 and 1358, right? Yeah. So think back to the mindset of the people of the day. It's not like us today.
No.
You know, what people don't tend to forget and tend to understand is they would have been a backward people. It sounds horrible, but even the kings and queens of the day, not like today.
No.
And I go as far as calling them a little bit backward. But in her own right, I agree with you. She was a force to be reckoned with, and she could have done a lot of good, and she did do a lot of work. But she's, again, one of these people that slips under the radar and is not brought up in history. No. We don't study that in our schools.
No. I mean, she to me is on a par with your Queen Elizabeths, your Queen Victorias. I mean, Queen Elizabeth I, she was pretty amazing, the stuff that she did, and I didn't really know much about her until I did my Tower of London show last year, and I focused on Queen Elizabeth, and it blew my mind away. The misconceptions about her, that she just beheaded people at whim, and she killed less people than her sister, a lot less, and she ruled for 10 times the length, sort of thing. So yeah, I think it seems to be, whether it's a sensationalising thing to get people to visit the place, whether it's a sensationalising thing to make it try and make it more appealing, I don't know. But I think it's a shame that I'd never heard of her until I started doing this kind of thing. I never got taught about her at school. I knew a bit about the Plantagenets, but that was about it.
Yeah.
But I think she's amazing.
People don't realise that Castle Rising itself, the site itself dates back to Roman times and before. Right. You know, there was an evidence that when the Romans were there, that there was a farmhouse. It wasn't a huge a huge place, but there was a farmhouse and tilling of the land to make enough money to have a private bath. You know, they weren't well off, but they had a private bath there. Can you imagine? People didn't have private baths in those days. To have a private bath was a big thing. I mean, we laugh about it now, but
well, even 1,000 years later, it wasn't really that common to have regular baths.
No, and even before that, you know, there was something there on that land. I mean, people just don't realise that Castle Rising itself, how old and ancient that place really is. I mean, this is even before Queen Isabella and the churches were put there. You know, this goes back even further than that. Yeah. You know, the Saxons arrived there in 632 AD, and they didn't remain very long. The Romans didn't. For some reason, the Romans didn't stay there long. They left in a hurry.
They couldn't cope with East Anglia. I don't know. They couldn't cope with Norfolk and Suffolk. There's very little Roman. Yeah. I mean, I'd like to think it's another amazing woman who's kind of responsible for that Boudicca of the Icenies.
Yes. Yes.
But no, there's very little Roman history in Norfolk and Suffolk to an extent. It's predominantly Saxon, and then the individual sort of rural tribes, if like the Iceni and that kind of thing. And that's always something I used to find interesting. You know, especially when you come into Essex.
Yeah.
And you got Colchester and then Chelmsford, which were Roman garrison towns, and it sort of, you could see where I don't know, because whether it was, I don't know why they couldn't break East Anglia any more than they did. It does surprise me.
the Saxons, they didn't last long there at Castle Rising either. It's like they arrived and it wasn't long before they're cleared off as well. So there was something going on at Castle Rising way before people were noting things down and keeping records and things. And it happened through history. And I think it was the king himself. I think, which king was it now? Norman did tell me. Yes. Radwald. Radwald, is that how you would pronounce it?
I don't know. How's it spelled?
Well, Radwald was associated with Sutton Hoo.
Right.
Okay, Sutton Hoo is, they had the Viking burial mound there with this important, I think he was a king. I think it was Radwald himself that was buried there.
Right.
But he's got associations with Castle Rising, apparently. And he said in the 7th century to get St. Felix there to clear the land, to sort it out, and to sort out whatever problem was going on there, and to convert people. Because Radwald, believe it or not, there was this... they found 2 things buried with him. There were pagan icons and Christian icons.
Really?
And with this connection with St. Felix and being sent to Castle Rising, it was they had the first. They found that there was a monastery that he built there, but not in a monastery that we would think of, like a stone brick built building. It was like in a circle or an oval with their own huts in there, and they would live in isolation until they come together to pray and things like that. Actually, the history of Castle Rising is just fascinating. People need to go there and find out.
Yeah.
It's, I love history and I get very excited about it, but
that's why we're getting on, Viv.
I know. I've known you forever. But the hauntings there as well. I mean, if you're into the paranormal side of it, Queen Isabella, you have the dogs, and it's said the legend says that it's her walls, but it wasn't. It's her dogs, and if you're lucky enough to see one, I sent you a photograph of one of the dogs that was supposed to be close by that you can see on Norman Fahey's website. But the EVPs of the dogs that you get in the room that you're sitting in, wow, they just blow your mind away. But that aside,
it wasn't unusual for gentry to have dogs, hunting dogs. No. That wasn't unusual. Probably what was unusual is for the woman to be the master of them.
Yes. Yes. To me, that showed the great power.
Well, you have to dominate them. They have to see you as the alpha. And for a woman to have that kind of to be allowed even to have developed that kind of gravitas would have been very unusual for the 1300s.
I think maybe she had to, really, because of things that she...
Because Edward was so insipid. I mean, Edward was meant to be quite... He didn't do hunting, he didn't do anything. He did more almost feminine pursuits.
It beggars the question, did he bat for the other team?
Well, that's always been... I mean, if you ever watch... one of my favourite historians is a chap by the name of Dan Jones. And he does an awful lot on the Plantagenets. That's one of his sort of favoured periods. And he did a show on it. And he said nobody knows. But that, obviously being homosexual then, even though I think a lot of the men were, it was a criminal... It was punishable by death.
And if you had this higher standing, like if you were the King of England and you were found, can you imagine?
Yeah. But that's why they reckon that Gaveston and then subsequently Hugh Junior, were actually his lovers and not just his mates. But then again, Isabella had 4 kids by him, so he must have done his duties at some points. But she was almost the if you like, the man in the relationship. So the fact that she commanded dogs, and that's part of the folklore, probably because they weren't used to it's one of those things that, like you say, it's all this sort of myths built on slight untruths, built on what people are they're more comfortable demonising someone like her than actually saying this is how amazing she was.
You can imagine when she's there at that fortress, because that's what Castle Rising is. The castle itself is not a castle, it's a fortress. And she would have guests, powerful people coming to visit her. She'd be inviting people to come and stay with her. So she would want to entertain them. Yeah. And what better way to do it than to take them off hunting? Yep. And you can imagine she would get involved in that. So she would want to be show people that she's a leader. I am capable of, keeping my own guests, whoever they are, occupied and at the same time having fun. So hunting was a second nature thing with them. So they would take their dogs and do whatever, and I don't know, bring their spoils back to the castle and have that for dinner that night,
So you've heard Isabella swish past you?
We've heard Isabella swish past. That was a fantastic feeling. I mean, I sat on the spiral staircase, just away from the entrance to the corridor to the White Room, if you like, and she was on her way up to the White Room. I was just so lucky to be in the right place at the right time, but to experience that, there was two of us that experienced that, and we sat there for a good 10 minutes afterwards with our mouths open, just staring at each other like, did you feel what I felt? And we couldn't talk then after that. It was just amazing.
I'll bet.
It was a good feeling. And she doesn't come across as an aggressor either, It's nice. I mean, if you go there and you're lucky enough, she does show herself during the day. And I don't believe that she is behind the more darker stuff that happens there.
Okay. Well, we're gonna get onto that in a sec, because I'm going to ask you about that one in a sec. But I was just thinking that she died when she was 62, and saying about the dementia thing.
Yes.
62 back in the 1300s is probably equivalent to well over 100 now. Yes. There's not many people who get to over 100 who don't have some form of dementia because of the fact their brain is basically wearing out. I mean that in the nicest possible way. Yeah. So it wouldn't be unsurprising for her to have exhibited what they would have perceived as madness then, because obviously they didn't know what dementia was. No. And so that, the laughter, but then again, the laughter that's reported could just be her having a good time.
Do you know what, as well, I thought about this, she entertained people there. She would have wanted laughter. Yep. So could it have been a replay of people having a good time there? Having fun. It might not necessarily, it might not necessarily be the time of Isabella either. Because what was on that site, oh my God, I would say to anyone with a love of history, go and do your research at Castle Rising. You will be surprised what you find. That what was there before the fortress was built, what was there before Queen, the amount of royals and how that passed through different people's hands. I mean, recently we can't really discuss it live on air, but we did sort of touch on the current owner, which is Lord Howard. From today, going back through time into history and how far you can get back. If you want to find it, I think there's some books that are written on Castle Rising. There is, I found links to them when I was researching for the show. Yeah. There's some theories that are going on about Castle Rising. There's even the work that Norman Fahey has done. Some of the finds that were found on the site that were excavated that I know that they keep locked in the cellar there, which was supposed to be the dungeon. It's not a very doomy, gloomy type dungeon. I was quite surprised when I saw the dungeon for the first time.
More like a strong room, just a strong room for people that could be,
It was like, well, is this it? It doesn't feel bad in here at all. But yeah, it's an amazing place.
So was Isabella the one who you think's guilty for pushing you down the stairs that time?
No.
Right.
I tell you for why. You people are going to think I'm crazy now when I tell them all this. There is a elemental haunting at Castle Rising.
Right.
And it's not in the fortified part of the area. If you go to Castle Rising, you have, just in front of it, there is a ruin just in front of the main doors, which was a church. At the northern boundary, around the other side of the building, if you like, with the bits that go downstairs, the steps that go downstairs, there is another ruined church.
Right.
There's two on the building.
Right.
It's in that place, we believe, and history is telling me the same thing over and over again. The Romans cleared off pretty quickly. The Saxons cleared off pretty quickly. They're all moving from the area, from that place, very quickly. They're not settling for very long. Why is that? It's because of this elemental. Now, I don't know if I mentioned St. Felix earlier.
Yes, you did, yeah.
Came to the place. Even he was brought in to sort that elemental out. Even he couldn't. And he thought the best thing to do would be to build a church on top of it. And there's been another church that was being built on top of it. They keep trying to bury it with this holy building, if you like, which didn't suppress it at all. It just made it more angry, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. How would you explain what an elemental is to someone who has just tuned in?
I would call it. I wouldn't call it a spirit as such. It's not one of these things that's people can imagine sprites, little fairy type with wings that fly around the woods and does magic tricks on people or whatever. It's nothing like that. This elemental, this energy came from the earth.
Right.
Okay, so it's something that no living being, I believe, would ever be able to control. It's not something that was ever born or its feet ever touched the earth.
Right.
Okay, and there's this energy, this elemental. I mean, there are ley lines that run across and through Castle Rising, and there's one major ley line. I think you would have to go to Uncle Norm for more information. But it's a major one that runs the breadth of, I think it's from Norwich and right the way down south somewhere. Right. It's quite a big thing that runs through there. Might have had something to do with it. But this elemental, this energy, if you will, it's quite nasty and it's quite aggressive.
That's unusual. I've never heard of that. All the elemental stories I've heard before, they've been quite sort of, mischievous, but not.
This is nasty.
Malicious. Right.
This is nasty. I mean, when you think that you've had the battles for the earth, for the area, for the land, if you like, you've had all these different types of people going on there. What did they do on the land? What were they fighting for? What did they bring to it? Did they feed it? Who knows? I don't know enough about elementals to be able to say, well, this is what made this thing angry. But this thing, and Uncle Norm, I'm going to call him Uncle Norm because he is my Uncle Norm. He had visitors to Castle Rising being pushed down the stairs. He himself, he's been pushed, I've been pushed. We've had people being slapped, people being ill, people having to just get off the site because it got that bad. And he actually got quite concerned.
Right.
So I'll tell you a little story about that. It's quite funny, actually.
Go on.
He had the Orthodox Church, which had a little chapel called St. Felix, after the patron saint there, close by. And the guy there, Father Tony Clements, came to Uncle Norm and said to him one day, is there any chance that we could celebrate St. Felix Day, actually in Castle Rising itself? And he said, well, I don't know, I'll go and ask the boss like and see what he says. And Uncle Norm said, he said to me, I didn't think that Lord Howard would give permission, but he asked him, got him on a good day, and he said, they've asked if they could come in, and he said, yeah, well, sure, why not? He goes, what harm could it do? So he allowed them to come in and do this special thing that they do for St Felix. Now you're going to have to bear with me on this because I can't pronounce this word. It's an Abbacythium,
Right.
came, which is the Bishop of Glastonbury, right? So that's what I call him. That's how I know him. He conducted the ritual there. I don't know what it is they do, this angelic thing, that you can imagine that a church would do. But he came there to perform this that evening. And after they finished, when they got to hear that Uncle Norm was instrumental in getting permission for them to be able to come in and do it, so he said to Norman afterwards, because he wasn't allowed to go in, Norman waited outside, and he said to me that he saw the incense coming out of the windows and the lights flickering, and he heard them singing, and he said it was lovely. But he said this Bishop of Glastonbury came out and said to Norm afterwards, he thanked him for letting them do this, and he said, "Is there something you would like me to do for you?" And Uncle Norm, in his wisdom, said to himself, "Yes, I want you to get rid of this thing that's pushing the visitors down the stairs." So he sent the Bishop of Glastonbury down there to go and get rid of the elemental. He said to me, he said, "This guy was down there for 20 minutes and he came back looking all worried." He said to me, "I've tried my best, though I don't think I've got rid of it." He said, "But if you have any problems," he said, "call me and we can discuss it." In other words,
don't call me.
I can't help you.
Right, one sec. Right, so but the fact that the Bishop of Glastonbury couldn't get rid of, but it doesn't surprise me that a religious entity can't get rid of something that's got no human bias, because it'll communicate in a completely different way, surely.
Yeah, well, the thing was, I said to Uncle Norman, it just made me laugh, and I thought, well, if it's an energy that he doesn't understand, how is he going to be able to get rid of it? He's not, is he? But
exactly.
He called in, apparently, Norman said that he spoke to a David Rawling in Rotherham that was an exorcist, a renowned exorcist, and said that, would you come down and help me, because I'm just worried about members of the public, because more and more people were being attacked, and even to the point where now, not a lot of people know this, and it's not put anywhere on any websites or anything, but in the 10 years that Norman worked at Castle Rising, there were 6 suicides at Castle Rising. Now, me being me, what do you mean there's 6 suicides? Did people come in there and just kill themselves? And did you find a mess in the white room? And that's how I am. I want to know the gore and I want to know the details. But what he did explain to me, that people were hanging themselves in the woods. People were shooting themselves with shotguns, and he said for it to happen 6 times in 10 years, he firmly believes that the elemental played a part in that, and he took it very, very seriously. He said there was a small village of about 200 people, and in 10 years, 6 deaths. He said, that's way, way too many, and, he got my mind to thinking, Was
that actual villagers, or people just coming there because they thought the woods would be a nice place to die in?
Apparently they came from the village of Castle Rising.
Wow.
And he said, that's far too many. He
For
said,
villagers, people who already live there, yes, that is... I mean, it's not surprising when you get certain areas, you do get a proliferation. Like, I know the Orwell Bridge, for example, a lot of people jump off that.
They go there, jump off it, though.
Yeah, the White Cliffs of Dover. A lot of people go there. They've got, I know that because the Samaritans have got phones actually at these points for people to call.
Yeah.
But so it's not surprising for people to go to a specific area because they think it's either going to be an easy, but for actual villagers, people who live there, to all go to.
So anyway, with that in mind, he said to me, Viv, he said, I ended up calling this exorcist. He said, well, I was desperate. He said, I felt a responsibility. well, yeah, that's Uncle Norm. He's a bit of a softie, and he does care for people, you know, even people he doesn't know.
Mm-hmm.
So he got this guy in, and he said, Viv, I'm not kidding you, it was the scariest night of my life. And he's quite a man's man. He's quite tough. Well, he used to be. He's quite tough, and you know, he questions everything, and he doesn't believe what people say to him to be real. He's a historian. He'll go back and get the facts.
Yeah.
You know, he'll do he said, honestly, Viv, he said, that night, I didn't think I was going to survive. Honestly, he said, I haven't been so frightened in my life. He said, but that guy came back. He said, Norm, I haven't got rid of it, but what I have done with it is calmed it down a bit. Right, and I always remember him saying this to me, that the elemental is still there, you'll never get rid of it, but we've calmed it down a bit. And I thought to myself, you've calmed it down a bit. I was there only a few weeks ago and I got pushed down the stairs. And Norm said to me, yes, he said, that is it being calmer.
So what scared Norm that night?
He refuses to tell me to this day.
Really?
I've tried so hard to get it out of him, you know. And he says he just changes the subject. And for him to be like that, you know, it does make me wonder what on earth did happen there. What did he see?
Can you not get him drunk? Get him drunk and see if you can get him talking.
I can try.
Because I'm intrigued to know what, even if we talked about it off air, I'm intrigued to know what scared him that much.
I don't know. But, you know, like Lord Howard as well. If you ever get to meet Lord Howard, you try and talk to him about the paranormal, he always dismisses it and he just totally disregards it and changes the subject, or he'll talk to you about something else, you know.
Yeah.
It's an interesting subject, you know, and I mean, I love Castle Rising. It's got a lot of lovely, great features in there, and the architecture in there is second to none, and the love knots. And if you look on the walls of Castle Rising inside, you'll see cats on the wall everywhere, like little stone carving of like the face of a cat. And I asked Uncle Norm, what was that about? He said they came with Queen Isabella. I went, really? But she like wolves. She's the wolf queen. He said, no. He said there was the cat thing going on as well, and she liked cats, so she decorated the place with cats. I went, really? Now that surprised me. You know, there's little things to Castle Rising that if people care to look,
if you look closely,
it's amazing. It's a beautiful place.
No, it is on my to-do list. It's on my to-do list. There's a lot of places on my to-do list. And doing this show, there's even more places normally. As soon as I get one knocked off my to-do list, another 5 normally appear on it. So, but it is somewhere that's on my list to go to. And I agree with you. You don't have to go to these places at night to experience things. You just have to sit back and listen.
I say go and see Castle Rising. Go into the village of Castle Rising and visit the pub. It's on what would have been Castle Rising itself, but and see the tea shop. You know, it's not part of the estate of the Castle Rising as it is now, but it's still very much Castle Rising. It's the village. Go and have a look at that. There's the Trinity Hospital as well.
Right.
Part of Castle Rising. I think it's an old people's home now, so you wouldn't be able to get in there, but if they had an open day and you happen to be in the area, go and see it. It's amazing.
What's it called? Trinity Hospital?
Trinity Hospital, yeah.
I could get into an old people's home. I'll tell you why off air. That sounds really bad, doesn't it? It's to do with my day job. That's
a place to go and see.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I mean, people don't realise we've actually been talking for nearly 2 hours before we started recording this show, and Viv and I had never met before, and I think we've definitely discovered a mutual connection here. So I have a feeling if Viv's up for it, she might be back later in the year for another show.
Oh, definitely, if you have me.
Of course I will, my love.
I think a bit of not say investigating, not necessarily paranormal, but looking at the history, and you mentioned Boudica.
Yes.
I live I live in Chatteris.
Yeah.
Maybe I should have told people that live on air, but I live in Chatteris, which is
Don't give your road name out, love.
No, but it's Boudicca's last stronghold, apparently.
Really?
So there's another connection I've got to you.
Oh, wow, yeah. Yes, no, Boudica, strong women in general. I think they're much maligned in history, and they're not given the recognition they deserve.
No.
Yes. So, generally, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Viv. I hope we do actually get to meet face to face one day, but we might need to get the coffee pot going because I have a feeling we might be chatting for quite a while. Thank you ever so much for your time tonight. I really, really do appreciate it, and good luck with everything you've got going on this year. All your trips to Holland and America and organising the conference at the end of September and everything else that you're going to get to do.
I don't know how I'm going to do it, but thank you.
You need to clone yourself. Yeah, find a good scientist and clone yourself.
Okay.
But say thanks everyone for listening to Parasearch Radio tonight in Haunted Histories. Don't forget we have shows on every night of the week, and if you miss it, you don't have to worry because you can go and catch it on Spreaker or on our YouTube page. But all that really leaves me to say is have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.